Okay, so we're good. So I'm speaking with Joel, and Joel said that he had some questions, or I think wanted a discussion. The question I got, if you don't mind, I want to read this. He said, "I'm a young man, 22, who has grown up in the non-denominational church. I'm very solid in my faith, and that always." However, I'm a very analytical and philosophical person. I live by logic, reasoning, and philosophy, which I know you may already think is a fallacy. That's correct. I'm not the smartest, but I cherish the idea of questioning my faith to either solidify it or to challenge it, which I got to commend. That's good, because I think that faith is otherwise honestly, it is the most dishonest position it is possible to have, and is entirely auto-deceptive. And then it goes on to say that you enjoy civil discussion, and I do too, though I very seldom get that in my job. So
yes, that's actually one of the biggest reason I really wanted to talk to you. You can hear me okay?
I can. I hope that there's no echo. I seem to have lost track of my headphones.
That's all right. No, this sounds fine to me.
All right. So my first question to you, if you don't mind me starting with a question to you.
Go ahead.
That you say that you're very solid in your faith.
Yes.
And then in the next paragraph, you say you're not, because you're questioning that. And my understanding of faith, the very idea that you question it means that it's not actually faith. It may be what you believe. You may be very confident in that, and maybe that's what you mean. I'm very solid in my faith. It means that I'm talking to somebody who is unreasonable, who will not change their mind.
Honestly, I think. Oh, well, okay. So let's say, for example, I know a majority of the atheist community, they say they're kind of very solid with science, right? That's very solid with the evidence and the facts.
Mm-hmm.
But what's all of science? It's questioning. It's always questioning to get further understanding of things. That's the sense that I meant. Solid.
Okay. Well, I didn't want to get hung up on a semantic thing. What I was implying, and I appreciate that you've already told me that this is not what you meant.
Yes.
But I have many times met people who say, well, you're not going to change my mind and I'm not going to change yours. And I have to stop them and say, well, no, if you had some validity to your position, then you actually could change my mind. And the only reason I can't change your mind is because you're determined not to listen to reason. And that's it. So, but I appreciate you've already said that's not your position. So that was my misunderstanding. We got that out of the way. All right. So opening with however you would like to open from here.
Well, honestly, the heart behind why I wanted to reach out for you, and I appreciate you even having me, is I saw many of your videos of just arguing and debating and all this. I'm just like, it's always like attacking, it's always like, and then I guess my big thing is, it seems like whenever a Christian or a believer converses with a non-believer, there's always this talk about trying to get evidence. They're always trying to convince you with some kind of evidence-based argument or something like that. And I don't think so. I think the very definition of faith means that you're not, I don't mean blind faith here. I just mean there's space for doubt. So therefore you need that faith in order to believe.
Okay. So what you're saying is that you interpret faith to be, what is it? Whatever percentage of doubt exists, whatever. See that I would call that trust.
Okay, I think they could be
from faith, because we have reasons to believe. I mean, we have all these indications that this is the way things are. Now, maybe something is wrong, and we should always be looking at where we are wrong, see if we can correct that. Mm-hmm. But with faith, and that's defined, as I understand it, by a firm conviction that is not based on scientific evidence. And everybody wants to argue that I got that wrong, but absolutely nobody can ever cough up that scientific evidence. So I got that right. Nobody ever came into a God belief because of evidence. That never happened, nor could it. I mean, I had somebody today who made that argument just a couple hours ago in my email, telling me how Mary Schweitzer found dinosaur blood and T-Rex meat, right, in fossils. And I'm like, if that were the case, if that were really true, then there would be peer-reviewed scientific articles saying so, and there are not. And if there were, I would know that. And also, Mary Schweitzer wouldn't be the one contradicting you. She wouldn't be the one complaining about how everybody is misrepresenting her research. She also wouldn't have changed her mind from young Earth creationism to old Earth, right? She wouldn't have changed her if that were the case, if you were right. So people, believers lying about her research are actually wounding her faith, and you should stop doing that.
I agree.
Those are the kind of arguments from evidence that I hear from believers. It's never evidence at all. Frauds, falsehoods, fallacies, that's all.
Right. Ashley, give me just 1 second. 1 second.
No problem.
All right. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I had something to write something down in case I had to, so I can keep on a good flow with this argument or this discussion. I don't want to. I don't want to argue with you. I'll tell you that much. I'm not here to debate or to argue, throw some apologetics or some like Christian teaching on, how to talk to an atheist and corner them.
I'm no good at the street epistemology either.
Yeah.
For whatever reason.
I could also tell you that you honestly probably know way more about the Bible and maybe even Christianity as a whole than I do. You've been doing this about as long as I've been alive, so I'm not looking.
The interesting thing about that, if I could just interject for a moment, is that what I hear from biblical scholars is seldom anything similar to what I hear from everyday believers. So, I mean, I'm very familiar with what the everyday believers, regularly profess. But like seminary students say, no, none of that's right. So there's a huge difference between biblical scholarship and what most people believe. So I just want to make that distinction.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think, like I think I mentioned in the email, I take more of a philosophical perspective on my faith. I think the think is the key word in this one. That's kind of like the easiest way for me to kind of grasp it or to kind of understand it. So talking about things like certainty is one of my favorite things to talk about. So there's a philosophy that you can never be 100% certain about anything whatsoever at all. Like, you can't even be certain that you're talking to me type, that kind of crazy philosophy where you can't be 100% certain about anything just because of, the limitations in our perceptions and things like that. All you can do is
let's give that some treatment if I can.
Yes,
I'm sorry
please.
to interrupt all the time. It just Eric Hovind, son of the convicted fraud and charlatan, inmate number 0645-2017, accosted me at the Reason Rally and said, can you ask that question? Can you be certain about anything? And I said, okay, well, if we can understand, if we accept that reality exists, mm-hmm. right, and that things mean things, like if you see footprints along the beach, somebody walked there, so evidence has meaning. If we can accept that reality exists and evidence has meaning, then we do know for certain that evolution is a demonstrable fact of population genetics, and the Bible is man-made mythology with no truth in it. That's it. Now, if you don't know that reality is real, right, and that was his argument, right, well, then in that case, then the Bible is still wrong in how the universe was created. So whether the reality is real or whether we're living in a matrix, either side of that philosophical question, Eric Hovind is still wrong. His position on creationism is still wrong either way, whether reality is right or not. Now, evolution would be wrong in the instance that reality isn't real. But then, as David Hume said, if we try to assume or try to act as though reality was not real, that is literally madness. So the only thing we can do, as he said, is the same thing that any baby has to do, that any beast has to do. We have to assume that there is some degree of reality, not necessarily certainty, but some degree of reality to what we perceive.
Oh, yes. Yeah, no, I agree. I like that philosophical approach to faith and to, I guess, non-belief. I don't know exactly what you would term your stance. Non-belief, I suppose.
If you're looking for my stance, and I say this all the time, almost every video, it is dishonest to assert as fact baseless speculation as though it were a matter of fact. I usually phrase it a little bit better than that, but if you You can't, like, the people will often say that, I know for a fact that there's a God. Well, you don't know that because knowledge is demonstrable with measurable accuracy, right? We can show what you know. You can test it. And it's not a fact because it's not objectively verifiable. You literally don't know for a fact that there's a God. You're just asserting that you really, really, really make believe that there's a God. That's not the same thing. It bothers the shit out of me when people tell me all these things that they think they know, all the details about who God is and what he wants and what he hates and what he's going to do, when they can't even show that there is a God in the first place, much less which God it is or what happened.
Exactly, all his characteristics and such.
So you should, that my whole stance is that you should never say that anything is true unless you can show the truth of it. If you can't show the truth of it, shut up. You can't even say that something is possible until you can show a possibility.
Right. Okay. So how do I explain this? I mean, I suppose this wouldn't necessarily be a response to what you're saying, since you were just more explaining your stance. I suppose the only so I wasn't using the certainty thing necessarily as a reason for having faith. It's more just a one of the many perspectives that I apply, the lenses that I apply to my faith. So a couple things that I hate is when people say they know things for sure. In terms of, like, let's see, God works in mysterious ways. That's a big, hate that one. Nowhere in the Bible either, by the way. I believe that God is a very orderly God. I think he's a logical God. And I believe he made things with order. And then I of course think, the next thing that comes up is he's not a God of confusion, which, I'm sure you're already thinking many. Yeah. Yeah.
30,000 denominations
right.
just within Christianity, to say nothing of the other four major, if you include Baha'i, that are all based on that same God of Abraham.
Right.
And everybody's been at war with each other continuously, each since their inception, over trivial interpretations. Don't even know what does this or that passage mean. Definitely a God of confusion, and even the Bible says that he makes people confused on purpose. So, how many times could the Bible contradict itself in confusing ways and still pretend not to be confusing?
So I'm trying to keep my train of thought here. So not the God of confusion, but I think there are, it makes me very uncomfortable when Christians do state these things as if they're, true facts. So I guess my stance with faith in terms of a personal lifestyle, right? Honestly, these kind of discussions, whether God exists or not, it's kind of like probably the biggest question in all of history. People have been going, it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop here. It's not going to stop in 100 millennia. Like, that question will never be satisfied until you die, pretty much.
I don't agree with that. I don't.
You think?
It seems to me that question had been answered way back with Epicurus, and that we still have people who want to. Here's my dichotomy of the way I see this. We have people who have only a desire to understand and to improve their understanding. Now, if you want to improve your understanding, you have to make sure that your information is accurate, and you will not trust anything that you can't show to be accurate, because that might be wrong, right? It's only the things you can show to be, and you're not going to be tentative even with that, because your own misunderstandings could get in the way. So you're working on finding the faults in your own perspective and trying to improve them. And then you have the wanna believers. They don't care what the truth is.
Can I just classify myself in that first part? Okay. No, I just wanted to say I'm the first one that you just said, but you can continue.
I kind of gathered that already, but there are people who say that they, who have told me many times, many ways, that they're going to believe what they want to believe, even when they know that it's false. Even if they could prove that it's false, they're going to believe it anyway.
Yeah, I have a problem with that.
Yeah,
I believe I approach my faith in a scientific way, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I'd stop using the word faith then.
Well, I use scientific and philosophical kind of in the same way, in terms of thought and thinking and deduction, I suppose, and coming to conclusions and figuring things out. I guess that's the context that I meant that. So I am very much one to, I will entertain the idea. I will straight up ask, okay, let's assume there's not a God. And I've had this discussion with many, many of my colleagues and peers. Let's say there's
a lot of believers lack the ability to speak hypothetically. So
no, I mean, I'm saying if there's not a God, let's say we have an internal moral compass that can exist without a God. Let's say we're all wrong and, you're right. Let's say all that. Let's talk about that and see how that looks. I guess, but that brings me back in my own head to think, and don't take any of this as the wrong way. This is strong hypotheticals. Let's say I'm very heavily self-deceived. Let's say that I've convinced myself just through my own brain power, which has been shown to be true to convince yourself of pretty crazy things. That
I'm former neo-pagan occultist here. That is correct.
You're right. Yeah. I also think that you said you were in the church at some point as well.
I was baptized in the Mormon church, but I never identified as Mormon. I did consider myself Christian because Mormons consider themselves Christians. And I mean, I was told, what is a Christian? A Christian is someone who believes that Jesus was, the Son of God or what. Okay, well, all right. If you believe that, and I believe that because everybody believed that, that means that I'm Christian, right? So that seemed to be the minimum requirement. I believed that. And then I was reborn in Christianity once upon a time when I was 19 for all of about, 4 hours, 6 hours.
That's a little short lifespan.
Yeah, until my minister revealed the dishonesty of faith. I asked him, when a lot of people, when they get reborn, they have this elation, which you get when you adopt any religion. They all talk about this kind of thing, this life-changing feeling, this euphoria that often accompanies this. And I asked this guy, I'm like floating around the room in this dazed haze, and I asked him, how do I know that this is really the power of Jesus and I'm not just fooling myself? And he told me with a huge smile that to just keep telling myself it's Jesus until I believe it.
Yeah, no, that's not how that works.
Last instance as a Christian right there.
All right. Well, I mean, I don't want to get too on a personal level just yet in terms of how that is just blatantly wrong, but
it's something else that I really got to inquire about. It's something that commonly comes up in Christian discussions. Like every Christian has this perspective, and it's wrong. And I'm mystified as to why do Christians think this? You mentioned morality, right? What if there's no God and we have a godless moral compass? As Christians, you have only the same moral compass I do as an atheist. You don't have a moral compass other than that. I've said many times that the only thing that you are saved or damned for is whether you believe impossible nonsense for no good reason. That's it, right? It doesn't matter. Morality is completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter how evil you are. Every sin can be forgiven if you but believe. But if you're a good person, then it doesn't matter if you don't believe, then it doesn't matter how good you are. Because the only sin that will not be forgiven is the sin of disbelief. So you are damned or saved. You're judged entirely on gullibility as your sole criteria for redemption. That's it. Morality does not even enter into it. Why do Christians think that belief in God is a moral issue?
Well, first, I guess my stance on that, and this would probably be its own discussion topic in and of itself is, and I don't want to play this card, but I'm going to find myself using it. Assuming that God is the creator of morality, right? So that, of course, to us, if hypothetically consider that scenario, right? You create these morals, you tell these people to follow these morals. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're obligated to them as yourself. To us humans, on our moral level, that's hypocritical, that's wrong. But then again, our idea of what's wrong and what's right. Okay, I'm bringing this back to philosophy, right? So one philosophical experiment that I love talking about in morality is, let's say that we have some people way up in far north in the Arctic, like some Eskimo tribes and such. There's a tribe up there who practices cannibalism, but only to respect their dead. So once one of their loved ones die, they then eat them as a symbol of respect, essentially, so they can live on within their family and relatives and so on. That to a lot of people is going to be a blatantly wrong moral thing to do, right? But to them, it's going to be perfectly right. It's like, how dare you not do that type thing. So, then we have they're looking at us, seeing us just like straight up burn our loved ones to ash and then keeping them in a freaking vase on the bookshelf or whatever, So looking at morality in that linear perspective of just a species, and then looking at, well, let's say a creator created that species, I don't think it's necessarily wrong for him to act outside of those morals sometimes, even though he asked us to act.
They're not morals, though. I mean, we're talking about whether something is moral or not. We haven't even defined what morality is. Now, did you ever see, you said you've seen a number of my videos. Have you ever seen a video by Theoretical Bullshit? He was a soap opera star named Scott Clifton. He made a video called A Treatise on Morality. Have you seen that?
I don't, but it sounds interesting.
If you're interested in philosophy at all, and especially on this topic, that would be a good one to see. It's about a 20-minute video, and
what was it called?
Good. It's really good.
What was it called?
A Treatise on Morality.
A Treatise on Morality.
Now, he gives a definition of what is moral. And its summary is a particular action or choice is moral or right if it somehow promotes happiness, well-being, or health, or if it somehow minimizes unnecessary harm or suffering, or both.
I've heard you give that definition.
Yeah, a particular action or choice is immoral or wrong if it somehow diminishes happiness, well-being, or health, or if it somehow causes unnecessary harm or suffering, or both. Now, I think we have a universal consensus that is correct. We can agree that that's what the definition of morality is. Given that, your people in your Inuit tribe or whatever, that your hypothetical group that's practicing cannibalism out of respect for the dead, that may be dangerous in the case of certain types of prions consumption, but as far as a moral issue, as you said, they're respecting the dead. There's not a morality issue there, and it's not just that they're different societies. We don't practice cannibalism a lot because we have like bad side effects from that, and typically because it is a violation of someone else's right to life. Right? That is diminishing harm or causing suffering or so forth. That's what makes it a moral issue. But if you know what morality is, now you look back at what God said to do and realize that God's not moral. God's commandments are not moral. God is commanding us to do immoral things. And then Ezekiel even says so. That God makes this admission through his prophets that he created commandments that were not good, that he forced these people to do things that they couldn't live up to, only to horrify them. And this is specifically talking about how in the fourth commandment in Exodus 34, he commands people to eat their own children, or excuse me, to sacrifice your firstborn on the altar, and none will show up empty-handed. And Ezekiel says that people were actually taking that literally and killing their children over that.
So the references, I just want to keep track of these references in case we have a follow-up or something like that. So you said the first one is Exodus 34.
Yes, because Ezekiel. The only time the Bible ever refers to the 10 Commandments as the 10 Commandments, it's the set in Exodus 34.
Right.
Which is not the set that anybody wants to see in a courtroom. And that first set isn't 10 commandments. It's actually dozens of commandments. Like 14 separate commandments just in Exodus 20. And then it continues on through 21, 22, 23. Right. And then it says that Moses came down the mountain with all of the laws and all of the edicts and everything. So there's quite a bit more than 10.
So, I think we might be getting off a little rabbit. I've heard your content extensively on the 10 Commandments. So, I don't think I necessarily agree, but I'm not going to say I fully disagree either. That's just more for me to. I don't think that has any weight necessarily either way too much on the full discussion of morality. That
would be a whole other discussion by itself.
Right, exactly. That's what. So
But it
I guess
doesn't get me to the point of the question about why Christians think that belief in God is a moral issue. I mean, so you have this thing about, divine command theory, where if God tells you to go slaughter innocent children in the streets of other people for no reason, if you run into a playground and kill everybody, if God tells you to do that, then that's a good thing to do because God told you to do that. And it doesn't matter how horrible it is. It doesn't matter how much pain you're suffering and how unnecessary that ill is. God told you to do it, and that's what makes it good.
I'm
That
not
throws me.
sure. So are you referring to like a lot of the areas in the Older Testament where those kind of things happen, or
No, I'm talking. We have a definition I just gave of what we can agree
yes,
is we would both agree is moral, right?
sure,
Sans religion, everybody in the world, regardless of if they discard religion for a moment, we all have a single definition. It would be immoral to go out and hurt other people for no reason, right? So that's part of it. And then we can use that definition to weigh God. Now, divine command theory says that whatever God says to do is good, no matter how evil it is. And no matter what good we do, we can't be good if we're not following God's commands. It's completely perverse. So I'm still lost. Why do Christians think that belief in God has anything to do with moral?
So I don't want to take anything to extremes here. I don't think it's 100% about moral. I don't think it's 100% a moral case, but I also don't think it's the opposite, like you would say, that it has nothing to do with it as well. Just because, so the point I was making earlier in terms of and this kind of ties back into that, it's basically the question, what is so bad? And the question when I was talking about self-deceiving, and let's say that I was just deceiving myself and praying, and somehow things happen, coincidences happen, and all these things happen, and I regard them as God's will and God's intervention and all these things, but they're just coincidences and sequences of things that are going on in my life. The question that I guess I have to you with that would be, what is so bad about that?
What is so bad about following evil commands and declaring
So,
to be good because the voice in your head told you so?
not exactly. What is so bad about living my life according to a set of values,
Which it can be objectively judged to be evil by the very definition we've just given?
well, so if we got into the nitty-gritty of that discussion, we'd have to go through every single
Just the use of the word values. Because
Okay.
I got to be blunt, and I'm not trying to be rude at all.
No, go ahead.
I've heard the phrase Christian values my whole life,
Right.
and Christian values equates to me as lies and cruelty. So, but that's it. It's
So
summarized. Christian values equals evil. There you
let me put it to you this way. The same way that you have a sense of morality, right? The same, because I've heard your talk on, you gave this a really funny speech, actually. I found myself laughing quite a bit. You were like almost yelling, how you don't believe in God, yet you're not going out raping and doing all these things, as if Christians somehow believe that if you don't believe in God, that you're going to be doing that kind
I've
of
had
stuff.
many Christians tell me that.
Yeah, and that's not right. I mean, Christians do it. Like, we're no better than anyone else's just because, we believe a certain way. So I have a very, very passionate problem with self-righteousness and I guess blindness to other people, or looking down on other people for how they believe. I'm very much against that. But talking about how you said, let me try and get my point back here. You said, you have that moral compass, right? You live according to what you, I guess, would follow as objectively, I can't say that word right now, objectively right. You live out your life according to what would be accepted as more moral, right?
There's a number of factors on that. I don't want to give a long answer, but I mean, I think it was Penn Jillette who said that he's killed and raped exactly all the people he wanted to kill and rape, which was zero.
Mm.
He just never wanted to do that. For a lot of us, we realize that there's a definite advantage to getting along with your fellow man as opposed to pissing off all your judges and peers. You know, we're going to be more successful if we get along. And so I think that this builds into us over time, you know, population mechanics. It builds into the most preferred person in society. This is going to be the ones that selected for, the ones that have a natural empathy and a compassion for fellow people and animals and other things. So we want to be productive. We want to be mutually beneficial and so forth. So, I mean, that's just, I think, the way that we are. And then religion comes along and says, okay, well, then this natural way that we all are, that's because of this guy I made up today. That's what that is.
Okay. So I guess I was talking more so on the sense that you feel about your morality is the same that I feel about Christian values. And I was just trying to clarify kind of what I meant when I said Christian values. The way that I'm living them isn't in a context of.
I have to say, when I hear Christian values, it's.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm not sure how else.
Like when William Barr said a few days ago, and a couple of other speakers in politics said the same thing just last week. This, you know, that religious believers deserve more rights and deserve more respect than non-believers who are not to be trusted because we have no values.
Yeah, no, that's not what I mean when I'm saying the word value. I'll try and figure. I'm just saying the way that I say that is, and the way that I live that, and what I meant by that is the same way that you live the way you do. Again, you know, you're not living in like this super negative, evil-minded way by this, you know, diabolical thing of atheism that's all out to grab all the Christians and choke them and send them to their hell.
I look at our contrast with Christians as not that I want to destroy Christians, I want to cure them.
It's interesting. Okay.
I look at Christianity the same way I look at, let's say, I can distinguish Christianity from Islam the same way that you would distinguish. You can tell whether somebody is addicted to heroin, whether they're addicted to methamphetamines, right? So there's different behaviors that are associated with each. So there's with Christianity, with Islam, there are symptoms of which addiction it is. But in either case, it's still an addiction. And then you end up with the people wanting to defend their addiction. And smokers are a great example of this, where they say, well, I smoke because I want to. I'll come up with any excuse. You know, I could quit any time if it was bad for me or whatever, or smoking's not really harmful, whatever excuse necessary, but they're defending their addiction. And then when you come away from smoking, when you actually finally do break the habit and quit, ex-smokers are just as adamant, or the most adamant, against smoking, just like ex-believers are the most outspoken against Christianity.
I see. I guess that would go back to my question, though, of, so assuming that I'm not, I guess what you would say, your average Christian. I think we've already got how long in without yelling at each other yet. So that's great. Yeah. You know, just in terms of, you know, if I
get a little animated, it's only because I've been doing this for so long that I
understand.
And
I understand. No, that's fine. I guess. So it goes back to the question of, let's just talk about for me personally, right? Just my own life. Just let's go micro here instead of macro of religion.
And I want to say one other thing too. Just since you're talking to me as a 22-year-old, when I was 22, my perspective was alarmingly different than it is. If I were talking to myself at 22 instead of you, we'd be having a very hot argument.
Well, I believe it. If I was talking to myself, probably, you know, when I get up there, I'd probably do the same. We'll see what happens with what in the future. But so just looking at me personally, and feel free to, you know, say what you like with this. This is just, you know, I'm kind of opening myself up here, being vulnerable with this question. Concerning me, someone who is willing to question these things, not necessarily rejecting them, only solidifying them so far anyway. You know, like I said, I grew up in the church. I know these things pretty well. Let's say, you know, and thus far in my life, they've only served to help me and to bring me peace and to bring me contentment and all these great things, and to believe that I've been blessed, and to believe that, you know, I've been saved and got all this peace and joy and whatever. What would you necessarily have a problem with someone like me continuing to live like that? Let's say it was just purely self-deception. Like, I know that feels uncomfortable just to say, like, I want to continue to live self-deceived, but what would be so bad if it was?
Yeah.
If I did live
What would be so bad if you leave the meth addict or you leave the heroin addict to their own ends?
Well, I mean, that's definitely an extreme example, but
I don't think it is. I think it's a perfect parallel. At the very least, you don't know not even what the truth is. You don't know what truth is, because you're making yourself believe something that is not evidently true, that is not supported. Every claim that every religion makes, you've probably heard me say this a bunch of times too, falls into one of two categories: things that are not evidently true and things that are evidently not true. There's not any truth to it, not to your religion nor to any other.
Okay, so
but to answer your question,
yeah,
my mother is a very elderly person. She still believes she's a Mormon. She has no. She had. I've asked her many times across the course of her life for things that distinguish what she believes or why, and she goes, "I believe what the Mormons believe." Okay, well, why do you believe it? Well, because that's what the Mormons believe. She believes what she's told to believe, and that's it. She can't have an independent set of thoughts. There's just what she's told to believe, and then there's what she's not allowed to believe. It's a very simple. It's a very weird psychological thing, but here she is in her upper 70s. And what difference does it make at this point if she goes on believing the fantasy that she's clung to her whole life? The damage that it did to her was in the last 50 years. It's not going to be in the next 5. It has done significant damage to her life in the last 50 years. The next 5, it's not going to make much difference. Now, were she like our attorney general, our vice president, the governor of my state, were they the religious right owning and controlling everything and legislating all of our rights away, then that would be another matter, and we'd have to hit him on another front. But if we're talking about just one person with his little heroin addiction, he's not going to be bothering anybody, fine, let him sleep it off in a corner. If that adequately answers your question. I should still be helping that person, but at some point, it's like I saw this movie where this guy is he's on all the oxygen tubes and everything. He's dying of cancer. He's got days to live, and he's smoking a cigarette out on the porch. And they're alarmed that he's doing that. He says, "What, do you think it's going to affect my health?"
That's pretty good. Okay.
Okay. Damage has been done. It no longer matters.
So if I'm to say that so far, pretty much a majority of the damage in my life here and so far, which I'm sure there's going to be much worse in the future, has primarily been to me kind of straying away, if you will, from faith, and then me coming back to it has almost kind of been the cure. And that is kind of like how I'm basing my life in terms of, everything, in terms of my compassion, my success, my failures, my family, and everything. I'm not sure if I would agree to equate that to a drug addiction, just because for me personally anyway, I don't believe that religion in my life has had a drug-like effect in terms of comes with negative consequences. All of my negative consequences here and so far have only been because of outside of it. So
I don't know how to necessarily equate or analyze what you're telling me, but all I can tell you is that accurate information has practical application.
Sure.
So the only value information can have to me is however accurate you can show it to be. If you can't show it that it's accurate at all, then it has no value at all.
Mm.
So it might make you feel good to pretend that that you're the best friend of the most uber powerful being in the galaxy. It might feel nice to imagine that you're never really going to die and that you're going to have magic powers after you're going to die, but not really die, because you're still going to be alive after you're dead, and then you have magic powers forever after that. Those might be really soothing fantasies for you. But if there's no truth to it, then there's no value to it.
Okay.
I'll tell you what, if you just limit it to what can you show to be true. Now think about every sermon you've ever heard. When have they ever been able to show the truth of anything they have ever said?
Usually you've probably heard this answer a lot before, and just let me talk here for a second. I'm not saying you're interrupting. I have these points that I'm kind of getting down here.
I'm inclined to do that, and I'm fighting it, believe me.
Okay. The number one evidence I'll say, and you can respond to this later, is people's lives. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. It's kind of like
changed lives?
Testaments, I suppose.
Pretending to witness things you've never really seen? I don't understand what you do.
I mean, we'll go with that. But changed lives, I guess. We'll go with that.
Which happens with every religion. Doesn't matter what God. It doesn't even have to be a religion. It could be something like Taoism. It could be belief in past life remembrance or extraterrestrial communications. The same kind of effect happens from all of them. And we know that it happens from every religion. So if it happens, if somebody adopts belief in Krishna, I've seen documents from like George Harrison and John Lennon going on about their religious belief in the Bhakti Hindu. If it happens for them, and it's not even an Abrahamic God, and they have a better relationship with their God than you do with yours, or that most Christians do with theirs, then where is the substance of that? What difference does it make if heroin makes you feel better than methamphetamines do, and that you don't want to give up all of them altogether?
Let me go back to that in a second, but I do want to address these other things. So we were talking about faith there for a second, and we can go on this for just a minute. The Bible defines faith anyway in one verse as the things unseen, which I thought was really evident, interesting.
1:11.
Right, exactly. Faith is the evidence of faith is the things unseen. I'm probably getting that backwards, but you know what I mean. You know what I'm talking about.
I phrase it a little different. It's the question begging fallacy. Assume what you want to believe.
So that's not how I interpret it necessarily. And then, of course, that's I guess one of the biggest issues is you have all these interpretations of the Bible, and I realize that could be an issue, a major issue.
No, it wouldn't be if the God were not the author of confusion.
Okay, moving past that. I understood. Loud and clear. But that's kind of, I think, an interesting definition in terms of the way I think of it is. This is kind of hard to say. So I'm being very kind of intellectually vulnerable with you right here. So the idea of being blind and then being able to see. Okay, so let's just, for some crazy reason, and hear me out, say that once you do believe, and there's no self-deception involved, then you really do truly see things in a different light. Okay, and this is one of the hardest things to tell somebody, especially someone like you, who's done this for probably as long as I've been alive, But let's say that, coming from, let's say you were blind, okay, just hypothetically, let's say, and I was drawing a painting or something, and then I'm trying to tell you about it, but you can't see it, and then all of a sudden you're able to see it, so you can't see how you weren't able to see it almost. So basically, how do I word this better? I want to explain this to you very well. What if it's not self-deception, it's actually coming to a different realization?
Then there's a way to demonstrate that.
What if it is on a personal level? See, I could see how that would only point. I could see how that only points to what you would think is self-deception. But what if you truly do get a different type of understanding?
Then you would be able to demonstrate that. Even if it's a philosophical perception, there's still a way to convey that so that other people will understand it. Mm-hmm.
So in terms of, okay, let's go back to me. I'll use myself then. In terms of me living out my life, right? I'm not, I live for God. I try and do things that glorify God, right?
I want to say right away that I feel sorry for you for just for saying that.
Okay, well,
It reminds me of when my mother told me as a little kid that we need to forsake our families rather than lose belief in God. And I thought no, that's evil. That's wrong. Your families are at least with you, and God can't be bothered.
I'm not sure why someone would have said that, but
you hear it all the time.
I mean, I've heard kind of God, family, friend, self. Sorry?
What about Matthew 10, where Jesus said that you hate your brother, your sister, and your brother, and your father, and your mother, and your wife, and even your own life in order to be his disciple? He came, he says, he came not to bring peace, but a sword, that he came to divide parents from their children and husbands from their wives and separate families in his honor. So it's not just that believers are saying this. The story says Jesus said that.
So, okay. So I've done research on those couple scriptures that you're referring to. Unfortunately, I can't remember right at this moment kind of my thoughts on them. I did have a lot of questions about them, and I actively did research on them, but I can't really talk to that at the moment. I just can't remember.
Down to the ultimate moral issue of that you have to believe. You're judged over whether you believe, not whether you're good or bad. That has nothing to do with anything. You can be the greatest, sweetest, most wonderful person anywhere ever, and if you didn't believe, you're going to hell. And you can be the most heinous, raucous, disastrous, vile beast, but if you believe, you can be forgiven. That's all it is. So morality doesn't even come into it, but you got to believe. Ultimately, you got to believe. Don't let yourself not to believe. Fake it till you make it, whatever it takes. Don't quite, make believe. That's it.
So
that's the biggest issue that I have with this. Why can't these believers be objective with this?
I believe it's possible to, and I know you disagree. I do believe it's possible to be objective with it and still be able to believe. I know I am talking to you as a younger man, as someone who hasn't been doing this as long as you. I probably, you probably know much more about my faith than I do.
I told you, if it was the 22-year-old me was sitting there, it'd be a live argument between us.
Okay. So at least I appreciate the cordialness then, I suppose. But I guess it's just a, believe what you want to believe type scenario. And, okay.
I don't get that choice. I don't have a choice to believe what I want to. If I did, I wouldn't be an atheist. I mean, I used to believe that there was like eternal reincarnations, that wouldn't just be as a different animal on this planet. It was like a heavy metal magazine back in the 80s, like whole different fantasy realms, and I'd be like a different kind of species and a different planet and a different level of technology. And maybe your benefit or detriment, if you maybe go up a level, like in the, video game, things will get better and faster and cooler or whatever. And maybe it does like that, but I had to eventually let go of all that because there was no truth to it. It's not that you cling to this belief until somebody can prove that it's wrong. That's not it. I don't get to believe whatever I want until you can prove it wrong. If I can't show there's any truth to it, then it may as well be wrong.
So here's the thing that's complicated about it. And I realize the issue that you have with what I'm about to say, because I can put myself in your shoes looking at it. What if, I don't like starting off with what if, but let's say you won't be able to know the truth until you accept it for yourself. And again, yes, I know. It sounds like self-deception. I'm just saying, for me, that's the case, I guess.
The truth is what the facts are, what we can show to be true.
So okay, all right. So we could talk about it. I have thoughts on that, actually. The discussion of truth is probably one of the most complicated discussions I think ever. And I love it. I absolutely love different perspectives on truth. I'm going to start off just with saying the scripture when Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, the light." I'm going to premise with that, just because that at least gives me a standing point. But in terms of truth itself, right? the truth can be disproven, and it can be
No, by definition, it can't.
no. Okay, it can be disproven by humanity, but it's still going to remain true. No,
It's truth, and you can't disprove truth.
I believe that you can there can be a deception around it, I guess is what I'm you can provide evidence against truth.
Maybe there's a truth and we only know part of it, but you can't disprove truth. By definition, it's truth can't be disproved.
Let me restart. Truth will always be true whether we believe it is or not.
Okay.
We can agree with that, right? Truth itself is I think the definition of true is that something's true. Like it's kind of like this very stable, absolute thing. Do you believe in absolute truth?
I believe that there's truth, that there are things that are true regardless whether we understand them, but in our ability to understand it is not absolute.
Yes. Okay, I agree with that. I can get behind that. So we can agree that something can remain true whether we know it, whether we misunderstand it, or whether something else. And then my point with the disproving one was whether we can, even if we find disproof in it, that doesn't defalsify the truth.
Right. And what I said about the definition of truth in our vernacular is when we declare truth. So it's got to be, I can't.
That's when it's manifested, right? Yeah.
Right. I can't show that it's true, then I have literally no right to call it truth.
So I guess, coming from the root of your stance is the inability of Christians to show that what they believe is true. That's a decent summary. Okay.
The requirement or necessity of faith is sufficient to reject that belief. As a matter of fact, every belief that requires faith should be rejected for that reason.
So let me try and figure out how I can respond with that. I made a post on Facebook. It talked just about this, and it was definitely coming from a very thought out perspective in terms of just because there's something evidence against it doesn't mean that it's not true. There can be evidence for something. Let's say circumstantial evidence for something.
Well, you said evidence against.
Evidence against the truth, right? You can have evidence against the truth without the truth.
Well, if we're talking about the truth as better than what we know, then no, there can't be. There can only be evidence against what we understand of the truth, and that our understanding is inaccurate.
So let me phrase it this way: just because you have evidence for something doesn't necessarily mean that is true.
That is correct.
Okay, that's what I was getting at. I'm sorry, that was getting a little confusing there. But just because you have evidence
against it, now we got a problem.
Okay, well, I think couldn't that go both ways? I mean, if you have evidence against something or evidence,
if you have evidence for something, it's like the rule in science that you can never prove something to be true, but you can prove something to be false. So you have everything, no matter every scientific theory is also a body of fact. It's like the atomic theory. It's a fact that all matter is made of atoms. Cell theory. It's a fact that all life is based on the cell. Germ theory of disease. We know that germs cause disease, and we don't use the word germ anymore, but we understand what that means, right? So every modern scientific theory is also a fact. But you can never, even though Einstein's theory of relativity was proven twice in a colloquial sense, once by well, never mind. Doesn't matter how it was proven, but once a couple of years ago, once back like 1919 or thereabouts, his theory was, in a colloquial sense, it was proven twice, but the scientific community doesn't allow that it can be proven at all. Now, you can have things that you predicted and it shows up exactly as you predicted, but you can never say that it's proven, because if you say that it's proven positive, that shuts the door on that we can learn more. That assumes that our knowledge is now perfect, which it can never do. Now, you can prove things false, and phlogiston is the last scientific theory I know of that was proven, that I can think of, that was proven false. Except vitalism.
Okay, vitalism
as well.
Okay.
Which is funny because vitalism ties directly into most religious belief, and that was disproved centuries ago.
So I see this going in a direction that I'm kind of scared of, because I don't want to come at you with oh, well, now you can't disprove my God type thing. that I'm very uncomfortable with that kind of that kind of stance. I don't agree with that stance. Just because you can't disprove something doesn't mean it's true. Okay, I understand that's faulty logic. I can also understand the faulty logic of, I think you said once, oh, look at these human eyeballs, therefore God, or something like that. I thought that was clever. No, and sarcastically
Okay.
saying, look at creation, therefore God.
Look at the sunset.
Or the sunset, something like that. And I do know people who, sorry, I'm also trying to find that Facebook post so I can explain this further, because I like this discussion. This is my favorite. I know a lot of people who definitely over spiritualize things. They'll give God the credit for every little thing that happens in their life. I'm like, well, that just kind of happened. So I don't think
it's never God's fault.
So
I saw this story once in the news. I thought it was hilarious. It was a tragedy, but the paradox that was involved was funny. A tornado hits this very tiny Iowa town. The tornado is headed toward a house, and this is a news story. This is not a joke. The tornado is headed toward a house, and it rises up off the ground, as they often do, and misses the house, comes back down across the street, plows up a field, but doesn't kill it, doesn't do any structural damage, doesn't kill anybody. Jumps over the next house, and goes on into town, right?
That's a wild boy. Jeez.
So it hasn't done any damage yet. There's one building in the center of town, the biggest, strongest building. Everybody floods to that. It's the church. That is the one building that is damaged. Killed everybody except 6 people.
Goodness.
And those 6
do you know how many died?
I don't. It was like 1990.
Oh, it was a long time ago. Okay.
Yeah. I don't remember how many people died, but it was like 1993, and it was a news story, and it was somewhere in Iowa. It was a tornado. But anyway, the thing is, those people on the news, one of them at least, thanked God for saving them. Your neighbors are dead. You're in a church, and you're thanking God for looking out for you. It looked to me like God was bowling for Christians and got a split.
I'm not sure if I can speak to that too much. I mean, I could understand where they were coming from, though. I mean,
yeah, thank God for killing everybody but me.
So I know there's situations where you can have those kind of scenarios, like let's say in war or something like that, right? When you get these guys coming. I'm in the Air Force, so I've seen some of this personally. You get these guys coming back, and they're the only ones who didn't die, and out of a group, so there's a lot of guilt that can come with, or shame that can come with that. I'm not sure. I can't really speak to someone else's words though, as much in terms of my own perception. If I guess if that happened to me.
Well, I mean, if everything is under God's command and nothing ever happens, it's not His will.
Ooh, okay, now you're pressing my special button. Okay.
Who created that tornado? Who gave it strength? Who gave it direction? Who drove that tornado and caused it to kill everybody?
So
except that one person.
You just touched on something that I absolutely love talking about, is free will, and also how God's supreme, I guess, plan, if you want to call it that, plays into free will.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say it's a kind of a topic I like as well.
All right, well, let's go then.
We don't have free will, but let's say that we did. Let's say it was possible for people to have free will. You as a Christian still can't have it.
Okay, so I 70% agree with you, actually. No, I'm sorry, 40%. I got that backwards, 30% or whatever. I don't believe that we have 100% free will that like a lot of churches teach. You have complete free will to choose what you want. No. Let's assume that my God is real. Okay. Let's assume that the Holy Spirit is real and has influence in the world. That in and of itself decreases the level of free will that you're going to have. Let's say he has the power to influence you by what you would say is people kind of just thinking that they're getting influenced by things. But just for my sake, coming from my perspective, let's say the Holy Spirit does have this strong influence in people with each other. That in and of itself, it doesn't negate free will, but it subtracts from it. where
What
it's not
negates free
100%.
will is God's knowing in advance.
Okay. All right.
Do.
I like this. This is good. I don't believe so. So I don't think that knowing something in advance negates that you couldn't make that choice. So let me explain this. I legit want to write a book on this. I kid you not. Here's my thought.
Surprise God.
Right.
So God calculated in advance, centuries in advance, according to prophecies, exactly what not just one person's going to do, but all of the gazillions of other little interactions that had to lead up to that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He has to know everything everybody ever is going to do, and nobody gets to surprise him, because if anybody does, that messes up the entire plan.
Right.
Which also creates a paradox about why people pray to God, because he already knows what you're asking for. He already knows whether he's going to do it. There's no point. And if he wasn't going to do it in the first place, you're not changing his plan. Thank you, George Carlin.
So I think I might have an answer actually for this one for you. So here's how I see. Actually, let me grab a bottle of water real quick, if you don't mind.
Good idea. I'll refill mine.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, this is kind of the meat of the stuff I actually wanted to talk with you about. I think we've got over all the other stuff that you normally talk about, but this is my favorite. So I have this idea or thought process I call the end game theory. And this is before the movie was a thing, so I want credit for it. Anyway, it's called the end game problem, more so. It was when I was trying to figure out free will. And so here's how I'm defining my terms. Let's say you have God's will, or aka his intent, his desire for how things will happen. And then you have God's plan, his supreme plan, right? And then you have us, because we're just this weird inconvenience that strips everything up. Anyway.
Anyway.
But okay, so we have God's will, we have God's plan, and then you have us with all our meandering, whatever the heck we do. And I also like to apply some theoretical physics to this in terms of dimensional concepts, in terms of higher dimensions above the four. I think it's interesting to apply that. I know it's entertaining, but hear me out.
What makes me laugh about it is wanting to go to higher physics and this higher level of thinking in order to justify a talking snake talking to a mud golem.
Going past that. Yeah, if I started talking about that, we'll go down there, and I want to stay on this one because it gets me excited. So I'm not necessarily trying to justify. This is just my thought process with these things, and how I've come to understand them. So let's say you have a fifth dimensional being, right? Just 5 above 4. You know, you're outside of time. You would see time kind of as a plane, essentially. So you can see. Well, let's see. I'll get it right here. Actually, you can see. I'm sure you might have seen this demonstration before. I don't know. You have all of time on this one line here. You know, beginning here, end here. That's it. Let's assume time hasn't always existed, and that at some point it's going to cease to exist. So this is assuming eternity is a thing. Let's say that this is just a fifth dimensional view of time, just one dimension above, right? So I already at this point.
We're talking about 4 spatial dimensions plus time.
Plus time, correct. Or three spatial plus time. Yes.
That's 4.
Fourth is time. So the fifth, now you can see time kind of as at one glance.
Okay.
So that doesn't necessarily mean that, let's say this was a person and this is their life. God knows how we actually look to God. we can't even think about how that would work. But
I would argue that God doesn't know that, but that's another discussion.
I understand. I understand. But let's say this is a person's life, and this is all the decisions they make. And the first thing a lot of Christians will tell me, they're like, okay, well, what if he goes that way, or this way, or that way, or this way, or that way? And like, he would have never done that because it's already been done. All the decisions have already been made. It doesn't mean I made them, though. They still made all the decisions. Now, that is at 5 dimensions. Let's assume God is at a almost infinitely higher, if not outside of dimensions, as we so call them. How much more complicated, but also how much more simple would it be to see our reality, see our 4 dimensions like that, and to even interact with them? I just because you can see everything happening at once, kind of like this ever-present, I'm sure you've heard it called God that is ever-present. Basically, he can see, he's present all the time. So basically, he doesn't experience time. You can still interact with this person and nudge them certain directions, but they're always going to have made these decisions, if that makes sense. And the key phrase there is that past perfect kind of approach is if you say, well, okay, well, let's say we brought up the thing of prayer, right? Let's say this person prays at this point in their life, and you respond to that. That doesn't mean that it didn't do anything. It just means that it happened, and you responded to it when it happened. And as a 5th dimensional being, going back to 5, or actually, let's simplify. I don't know if you've ever seen Circle. What's it called? There's this movie, Flat something. It's about dimensions and stuff. It's really good. Basically, it's a 2D world, right? So all these figures are flat, right? Just two-dimensional. They can't go up and down. They don't have no breadth.
Like a Pong game.
Yeah, so like that. So, but they were living beings, right? So these living beings were 2-dimensional figures. They were intelligent. They had their lives and such, but they couldn't go past the line, right? They couldn't. If they hit this line, they couldn't go past it because that's a wall. So they'd have to go around it and such. And then what happens when you have a 3-dimensional figure kind of moving through this, right? So they would kind of
appear out of nowhere and disappear into nothing.
Correct. And that's 1 dimension up. And this is kind of assuming that the God I believe in is far outside of 5 dimensions. To me, I would be comfortable believing that he would be able to influence emotions and influence influence free will, kind of make things happen in a sense. I don't think that would be too far outside of logic. I think it helps explain metaphysics a lot easier.
Before you float away too far, I want to give you a touch
back
down to earth for a moment and remind you that this God that you're arguing for lost an argument with Abraham because he's just a guy. He's a guy with magic powers, but he's just a guy. And we have further embellished the magic man and made him invisible, and we gave him a mountain, and then we gave him a cloud, and then we gave him a whole new dimension so that we can keep hiding him. So that it's obvious that he's not there.
Actually, I thought you were talking about when Moses had a kind of bargaining situation with God.
No, I was talking about when Abraham did. I mean, this is the...
Oh, sorry, you said Abraham. My apologies.
He doesn't know how many people are in Sodom who are righteous.
Yes.
Right. So, I mean, how can he not already know that? How can he not already know that he's going to have this conversation? God, the way you're describing him, is Rod Serling. Have you heard that analogy?
I don't know. Go ahead.
Okay. Rod Serling wrote The Twilight Zone. In the Twilight Zone episodes, typically, the people who do good things have good things done to them, and the people who do bad things or are cruel or selfish tend to get their just desserts in ironic ways. Now, this is because Rod Serling wrote the script. There is no way, think about this because this is important. There is no way that God could affect everything everybody does. He can't help you find your keys. He can't help you win the game. He can't do nothing at all, unless he wrote the script. And that's it. He's the script writer. He's Rod Serling. He wrote The Twilight Zone. And so back in the days of VHS, because the analogy doesn't really work with like MP4s. But if you plug in the old VHS tape. You were there before the movie started, and you're there after the movie ends, and you know what's going to happen. And it's like Rocky Horror Picture Show. Did you ever see the Rocky Horror Picture Show?
I don't believe so.
Okay, so it's one of those interactive. It's a movie that everybody goes and yells at the screen, and so we're yelling at people on the screen while things are happening. And at one point, the major bad guy says, "Wait, I can explain." And the audience said, "Better be good. It got you killed last week." Because last week when we saw it every week, right? We see the same movie every week. We know what's going to happen. These people can't change it. We know, we can tell you in advance, and he will say this and they will say. It's like when you read the Quran, and the Quran is always talking about the future, where it says this person will say this, and then the devil will say that, and then they will say this. Well, how do you know what everybody's going to say? Right? The Bible's the same way. It's just like Rod Serling wrote the story. There it is. There's no way he could actually control anything. If you pray to God to help you find your keys, what is he going to do? What mechanism is he going to use to do anything at all?
So forgive me. I think you may be just oversimplifying this just a smidge. So as from what I've gathered you saying is either God has written all our decisions down, because I understand that in order for, let's say, a prophecy to come true, let's say the book of Revelations, all this stuff needs to come true, right? Otherwise it's completely bonkers. And this is why I call it the end game issue, right? There has to be a point there that everything says that the Bible or that God says is going to happen has to happen, right? Otherwise it's just invalid. But in order for something like that to happen, let's say like a catastrophic event like the end of the world, every single human being on the planet with all of their wills would have had to make very precise decisions in order for all of that to come to that one point, right? If someone deviated outside of that, I guess, I don't know what you'd call it, plan, it wouldn't happen. It would, technically it would create an alternate timeline, and, that's all that stuff. But you can't deviate outside of that is kind of what you're saying. So basically that would completely negate free will, because God would have had to make every single decision that would make.
He wrote the script.
He wrote the script. And then the other extreme to that is the whole winding clock theory. I'm sure you're aware of is,
I'm not.
No. Okay. Well, it's basically the other Christian belief that I'm very uncomfortable with, where God kind of just created everything and just kind of let it, it's all just kind of going to happen as it will. And he doesn't really necessarily, he kind of got a hands-off approach, essentially.
How could it be any different? God was supposedly surprised when in the Garden of Eden, he laid out the trap, he set the bait, he put in two people that were deliberately made to be super naive, no idea what they were doing. So they're guaranteed to flip the trap. And not only that, but he put the talking snake in there to lead them to it, so that it's guaranteed they're going to fall for that trap. Yet God set the trap, had to know the results, had to know the inevitable outcome, and yet it still surprised him. How's that possible?
All right, so that is a tough one. Actually, that's one of the, so I've entertained this whole thing about like the end, right? Everything having to come to a culmination point. I'm not sure if either of us could properly explain what you were talking about in terms of.
I think I can. It's a story people made up. There's
okay.
No
well, besides that, assuming that it was true.
None of those characters really existed.
I'm saying assuming that it was true, or heck, even if it was a fable,
And it was. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Adam and Eve are a fable. They are adopted from other fables, older fables that had other details. That the parent part of the story was completely different. It's just the trivial details that lead to those characters, the only thing they kept intact. There is absolutely no. We know for certain there was no Adam and Eve.
I guess one of the most one of the questions I currently am trying to kind of analyze and look at is the whole. Okay, now I'm going to put the assumption that it was a thing that took place, just for terms of this argument. Let's say it took place. From what I always like to think about, and I'm currently trying to challenge exactly what would have happened if they didn't eat from the tree, essentially not having that knowledge of good and evil.
Here's a better question. Not if
Okay.
they hadn't eaten from that tree. What if they'd never eaten anything at all?
Well, so could you explain what you mean behind that question? I'm not sure.
Yeah. What's the last verse in Genesis 3? Says that God had to take it's not actually.
Oh, he kicked him out of the.
Yeah, but why did he have to do it? It says he had to take them out because there were two trees in the garden. There are two magical trees, obviously metaphorical trees. These are not literal trees. These are metaphors. Everywhere else that the Bible talks about the fruit of, it's talking about the results of choices made or actions taken. Every other place it's a parable, it's a metaphor, except in Genesis 3, where it's the one place where they take it literally, and it can't be literal. We know that these are not trees that you could cut down and build a house out of. You had the choice to eat of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, or eat of the fruit of eternal life. If you eat of the fruit of eternal life, you'll just stay as you are forever and be happy. But if you eat of the fruit of tree of knowledge of good and evil, then you have achieved morality, which takes you to a level above the other animals around you. And then, as the old adage goes, you can never go home again. So that's where the loss of innocence is. That's what the metaphor means.
Okay, I can agree with that.
But, and we know that it's a metaphor. They're not real people. There was never a snake that talked to anybody. So then, the snake was never supposed to be Satan either, but that's a whole other thing. So
yeah, I know.
God had to take Adam and Eve out of the garden lest they eat from the fruit of the tree of eternal life, because then they would live forever. So if they wouldn't live forever unless they ate of the fruit of the tree of eternal life, then what happens if they never ate from either tree, or if they never ate anything?
Yeah, I can't answer that. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Obviously, sin did not bring death into the world. We are animals, which means that we have an internal digestive tract that requires that we, in order to sustain ourselves, we have to ingest and digest other living organisms, right?
Of course.
And Adam will die. He has to subsist by causing death and other things, but even if it's just fruit, all right, we have to kill those living cells. And he will not, he's going to die himself if he doesn't eat the fruit of the tree of eternal life.
Right.
So God had to yank him out of the garden before he would do that. Clearly a metaphor. Just
a quick thing. I'm not sure about that second tree you're mentioning. I'd like to just check up on that when we're done here. So, but what do you know where that is specifically, or what?
If it's not the very last verse, it's one of the last verses in Genesis 3.
Genesis 3. Okay.
Just off the top of my head.
I'm gonna check that out.
And I'm sure, I'd have to look it up again, but I'm sure it mentions the tree before then too, where it says you can either eat of the fruit of the tree of eternal life or eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And then later we make reference to it again, that he's got to take them out of there before they eat of that other tree.
And this is the Christian Holy Bible, right? It's not the Mormon. Just making sure.
There's a Mormon Holy Bible?
There is. It's a difference.
Funny, my mother would not know about that, and she has a position in the temple.
Oh, yeah. Well, at least there's some ad libs that are just slightly different. But no, that's a different.
They don't change the Bible.
Okay.
Now there's a gazillion different versions of the Bible. Author of confusion. So you've written in such a way that every language is going to treat things completely different. And then there's traditional interpretations that are all very different. But what they did is like what most religions do. Baha'i, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and Islam all added a book. So they keep the Tanakh, they keep the Gospels or letters of Paul and all that, and then they added their own book afterward.
Okay. Well, I suppose I stand corrected with that. Maybe I had the wrong one of those books in mind or something.
Price.
Sorry.
They have the Pearl of Great Price. They have the Book of Mormon.
Okay.
But it's not a replacement of the Bible, nor is it an alteration of the Bible. They accept the Bible. Islam does it differently because Islam needed another prophet because Jesus was just a prophet, and Jesus never died in Islam. Jesus is still alive, walking around healing people.
Oh,
And he's a prophet. And when you go to Jesus, Jesus will refer you to the true prophet, who is Muhammad.
okay.
Yeah, but the Quran explains that the Bible was corrupted by men, and that's why everything the Bible says is wrong.
Okay. So I'm just going to kind of move past that. There's two more things that I want to talk to you about.
Okay.
Well, let me write the second one down so I don't forget. And then I think we'll probably be out of here because these might take another minute.
I will do my best not to drag this down any further.
No, don't. I love this. It's literally why I called you. I think hopefully you've had a decent time already. This has been quite nice. So here's my Facebook post. I found it. So basically what I said is, this is going to be interesting for you to hear. I'm curious. Just because something is a lot, and this was something that came from Philosophy 101, like one or two level class. So it is a concept, but it's on truth. Just because something is logical doesn't make it true. Just because something has evidence still doesn't make it true. Both of those things merely point towards the truth, but the truth will be true regardless of them or not. That's, I mean, would you have any contention with that?
Agreed.
Oh, okay. Well, that's easy. But I guess
logical arguments that if you strict just with logic, yes, that would be true. But we know that it's not evidently true, and it's not actually true. Likewise, as we mentioned before, you can have evidence to indicate something, but if your understanding is incorrect in any way, then some experiments, for example, could produce the predicted effects. And it's kind of like when you play 20 questions, and every question gets you down an additional piece of information. You are closer to zeroing in on your target, but you still don't actually know what you're talking about. You've just ascertained a number of these things up to this point.
Okay. Yeah. No, I get that. Okay. Well, I at least we take the same relative stance on, I guess, what truth is, just vastly different on exactly what the truth is. But I guess that's good to find common ground. That's kind of one of my goals here. And it's cool, because one can say we're pretty opposite ends of the spectrum, yet I hope that you can find that I am at least relatively inquisitive and have a decent understanding, at least, of these objectionable things. I guess so. The second thing, and perhaps the last thing, I just kind of wanted to talk about a trip I had a couple weeks ago. I actually went out to I'm here in Ohio, and I've always been interested in the Amish, not just for religious reasons, just because I was interested in their lifestyle and such. Very interesting. Who? The Amish people.
Okay.
Yeah. Have you ever been into their area or the village or anything?
I've been to Ohio twice. Once I had a really great weekend in Columbus for a conference, and another time I remember calling my brother and saying that, you may hate the podunk little town you're in right now. Maybe your life is not in a great place, but at least you're not in Akron.
All right. Okay. So you do have some experience in Ohio. Gotcha. I'm not from Ohio. I've barely been here 2 months, but I'm from New Mexico.
Yeah.
Air Force takes you places. Anyway, so I visited the Amish, and I got some interesting perspective that I think you might appreciate, at least. So with what you might know of the Amish, they definitely restrict themselves with technology for religious reasons. And I actually got an opportunity to, I had a lot of time with them. I got to eat a meal with them. I got to go to one of their festivals. I've kind of got to see how they actually have progressed with some technology. And then I actually got to go on a Sunday morning to a 4 hour long church service, like one of their smaller church services. And it was long. I'll tell you what, it was very long, but it was afterwards. I then sat with basically the elders of the church, the leaders of the church, and literally just went ham asking them all this stuff. Well, a lot of the stuff we've talked about, actually, in terms of truth and the Garden of Eden, because that's their literally everything that they do in terms of what they restrict themselves with is because of these very solid beliefs. And they're pretty much no different than what I believe. They just draw different lines, I suppose. So I was asking why not have rubber on your buggy things? Why not own such and such, or have a car, or all these things? And I got talking with one of these really intelligent guys, very, very intelligent. He was one of the elders there, and he was very well spoken, and he knew what he was talking about. We were talking about the free will thing and the end game problem. But ultimately, one of the biggest things I noticed was, one, the lack of self-righteousness that I saw. I went there thinking, so I told you I've been in the church a while, and I have experienced and seen a lot of hypocrisy, self-righteousness, and I believe that's number 2 on the top. Hypocrisy in the church is number 2 on the list of reasons people become atheists. Number 1 being they've read the whole Bible. I remember you saying that. Anyway, but when I went there is this complete lack of self-righteousness. There is not this kind of, and I kind of viewed them as almost this kind of extreme of religion, essentially, where they're purposely restricting themselves from society and living these rural farm lives, and only having cell phones, like maybe in an outhouse or something, or not, no television, no computers, no nothing, no cars, even no electricity, minimal amounts of electricity. And so I kind of viewed them as this kind of extreme, who might see someone outside, such as myself, who practices their faith differently, as kind of like looking down on me, like, well, how dare you partake in such and such, or drink alcohol, or do whatever, what have you. And it was the complete opposite, and it was very shocking to me. But then I started thinking, because that was the same weekend I actually emailed you. I emailed you right before I left on that trip. I forgot why. I had a good reason, but anyway. And that's where I got this question for myself, is what? Actually, no, that's why it was, because before that and on my trip over there, I was just binge listening to all your videos. That's why. You're welcome for the views. Anyway, what is so? I was asking my question about their lifestyle. What is so bad about their lifestyle? And I'm like, well, how dare you not how dare you not experience these other things that we've experienced, and done these other things, or use these things that bring luxury or leisure or convenience, all just for the name of religion? Like, why would you do that? And then I'm just thinking, these were very content, very happy, very successful, mind you, people who were fine, and so I guess it just comes back to
the same kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, I've seen people interviewed in I forget what the name of the Bush people in the Colorado who speak with, like, clicking. I forget what the name for their group is, but I remember seeing an interview where they're having this conversation. There's the subtitles, and it's a very intelligent conversation. I don't understand it because it's not in English. They had to have subtitles for me, but it is obviously a very intelligent conversation. This is somebody that lives in a grass hut and is perfectly happy, way in the middle of nowhere, no electricity, no plumbing, no nothing, right? Mm-hmm. And they're perfectly happy. That's because people adapt to their situation. They adapt to life. Mm-hmm. That's what it is. Why are they nicer? I mean, I had the same thing where I met neo-pagans. That's how I got into that. Was I meet a witches coven. I meet a bunch of witches or Wiccans, and they're nice.
A little difference there.
They're fun people, right? Well, they all are when they're in an extreme minority position. It's when they own and control everything that there's a problem.
Okay, interesting. So
we saw that even with the pagans. We saw that in Greece, for example.
So you don't necessarily have too much. Actually, I do recall you saying, I don't care what you believe. Essentially, you've started a lot of your videos out that way. Actually, you don't care what you believe, just why, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess that kind of answers that question. I just kind of wanted to discuss kind of
And on that point, if I may interject.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead. This is pretty much it here. So.
People use religion as their reason. And to me, if religion is the only reason you've got for any action or policy or what have you, then you still haven't given a reason, because religion is not a reason. You should have something better than that before you describe it. I mean, it's literally no reason at all. My personal opinion.
So here's my thought on that. I don't believe that it necessarily has to always be 100% the reason, right? You know, there's scriptures and things that talk about how, you know, everything you do as unto God type stuff, right? I believe that is supposed to be in terms of like the heart behind it, I guess, your overall state of how you're living your life. I don't believe it always has to be, you know, I'm folding these clothes for Christ, and I'm washing these dishes for Christ, and, you know, I'm driving this car for Christ, and, you know, what have you. I believe you can, you know, whatever, listen to a podcast while driving or while folding your clothes or whatever. But the action itself, some people just do hyper spiritualize these smaller things. And
well, how about, for example, here in Texas, we have a group in South Texas of Christian Scientists.
Ooh, those are fun.
I hate that they come up with that name, because it's so not what they say it is.
Yeah, me too.
But they deny, you know, with transfusions. Excuse me. I have dogs that.
No, I know, it's fine.
When I'm doing a podcast, stop.
He's cutie though.
And they got to play, and it ruins every podcast. I don't know what I mean. Shoot tranquilizer darts into this polar bear. Anyway, what was I saying? Damn it.
Those Christian Scientists, you hate their name.
Oh yeah, well their children. They will deny their children blood transfusion. It'll be completely necessary. It'll save their life. It's an easy procedure. Everybody does it, but they're not going to because of religion. So you're gonna let your kid die because of religion. You don't have a reason. You're gonna reject medical science, beneficial medical science. No reason. You're gonna refuse your kid. You know, there's dozens of children in the United States every year who die because their parents deny them medical coverage because they want to pray for them instead. It's not even a money thing. You would have a fine excuse if you say we just can't afford it. I mean, there's always a clinic you can go to in that case. But they use religion, so they just don't even have to they don't even have to look in the phone book to find out where their options are. They're just going to deny their kids altogether, and then literally wish upon a star that they will suddenly get healthy on their own. And then, of course, they don't. And so we've just now started, just in the last few years, started putting these people in jail where we didn't before. They used to get a pass. There was one family killed 4 of their kids this way through negligence before we finally started to say, hey, why are we letting these people do this? Why aren't we punishing them?
Yeah, I agree with you. You know what? I think we probably agree on a lot of things that a lot of Christians do wrong. Like for example, what you just said, or maybe for the whole self-righteous thing, the whole, you know, I'm right. Like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm right and you're wrong. I'm not going to say that. And a lot of Christians do. They're like, oh, well, here's a whole ton of evidence for a God that's not evidence-based, that I have faith in because I know he's real, which in that case, you wouldn't even need faith in the first place. So, you know,
with scriptural interpretation, I don't like discussing scriptural interpretations or philosophy for the primary reason.
Sorry there.
For the primary reason that there's no solid way to prove who's right or wrong. Because it seems to be the way to win an argument with a philosopher is to have more credentials than the philosopher you're arguing with, because that just seems to be all that it takes.
Argument from authority. Yep, sometimes.
I am erroneously associated with like logical positivists, even though I reject verificationism. Doesn't matter. They're just going to, you know, I said that I don't want to believe something if I can't show that it's true. Well, that means that I'm a logical positivist. It doesn't, but people want to say that anyway. And they'll say, well, that fell out of favor in the 20th century. And so, okay, fine. That fell out of favor. The thing I never adopted in the first place fell out of favor in the 20th century. And now you're going to cite Aquinas, even over Hume? That doesn't make any sense. There's no justification in that kind of logic. But what I do like to talk about is things that we can solidly prove unambiguously is right or wrong.
So,
and that's why I talk to creationists about evolution. Things I can prove to be true and that I can prove to be false. That's where the whole win is in these conversations for me. It's not in philosophy, because we'll both walk away still believing the same thing. Doesn't matter. But
no, I think we still will. But
because we can't prove it, right? So I don't know how you could make a compelling philosophical argument that would cause me to change my entire position, but a science-based, evidence-based argument will. And I've had to do that a number of times in my life, where I've gone in with a certain, a certain perception trained into me, if you will, and then I've taught that it's wrong. And sometimes it's painful to discover that, but I have an obligation to change my mind. I don't even have a choice. It may be that I want to believe this other thing, but I can't. I have to accept this now because this is what's supported. I don't have to believe it. I can accept that this is the one that's supported. It's like with Big Bang Theory. I don't believe the Big Bang Theory. I don't even like the Big Bang Theory. Honestly, I don't.
No, I know. I've heard you say it.
I don't have a better explanation. so
I'm not going to tell you, therefore God, either. So
yeah.
So I guess my thing is, this is kind of hard because I know how it sounds, right? And I know how you've talked with a lot of these Christians who. There's this one guy who you recently spoke with. He was relatively aggressive with you too. I didn't appreciate that at all. He kept shutting you up and calling you out, and you rightfully got decently heated. He was, I forgot what his name was. But you were talking to him. He was talking about how it's the different types of evidence, right? There's like the scientific, physical evidence, and that's not what God would have. He was like trying to say, well, you can't prove a God with this kind of evidence because he would, something like that. I forgot what, but anyway, it was a bunch of bullcrap the way he presented his argument. Sorry?
I said I wish I could remember which one you're talking about.
Yeah, I know there's lots out there, but it's just unfortunate. I'm sorry that you've had so many aggressive. I hope I haven't come off much aggressive at all.
Are you kidding? I'm doing my best to keep myself restrained, because I mean, it's like I said, these little buttons. You get into the certain routine of the certain types of arguments, and you tend to make them the same way. It's kind of hard not to when you've done it so long.
I understand. Well,
so on that last point, like I said, I would like to. I would love. I'm not interested in the philosophy. I'm not interested in scriptural interpretations. I'm not interested in anything we can't prove to be right or wrong. But creationism makes a whole bunch of statements that are definitely wrong, and that I can prove that they're wrong, and it doesn't require faith, and it doesn't matter how much faith that you have to the contrary. So that's what I try to stick with, what we can actually show, so that it does not ever come down to, well, you believe what you, no, it's not what I believe. My beliefs or what I want to believe has absolutely no relevance here.
When I said that, I was more meaning you towards me, as how you might view me, like believe what you want to believe type thing.
We established right away that you're not, I mean, really in the first minute or two, we established that you're not in the categories of anybody that I would have to have a reaction to. I mean, you're fine. Don't worry about it.
Okay, but thank you very much. I appreciate that. That's one of the biggest reasons I actually wanted to talk to you as well, just kind of to be not a super argumentative Christian that claims that he has a ton of evidence for God, scientific evidence for God, and that I can understand that as well. It's not just something that I heard or something. I understand your position. I've heard your position very loudly, very clearly, very thoroughly. I guess if there's anything I would kind of want to leave you with is the question of, I know it makes you uncomfortable. I know you've been asked this before. There has to be kind of some kind of closing thing here, and something I'd like to leave you with, and you can leave something with me as well, and it's something that I can look up, or I've got a bunch of notes here for scriptures and such, that philosophical video. I'll be taking a look at that here. My thing is that question of, and I trust me, I know it sounds crazy, but you'll only seeing the truth of something or only gaining an understanding of something after once you started believing it. I know that sounds pretty much like the definition of self-deception, but being, hearing so far with my life and kind of a lot of the conclusions I've come to, and I think I'm relatively intelligent. I'd like to think anyway. I don't know if I'm smart, but at least intelligent, or I think things through a lot.
Oh, I talk to a lot of people. You're definitely on the high end.
All right. Well,
I normally meet. So
okay. Well, geez, thank you. That means quite a bit coming from you, sir. Because
you've seen my debate, so you know what I'm usually up to.
that is true, and it gets very annoying when I'm just like, just say this, like just to cut them off or something. Anyway, because I do hold you a high regard intellectually. You're a very, very, very smart man. You've done your research. You know what you're talking about. So when I say that something like this, I want to come at it with as much validity as I can from what I know as a young 22-year-old who, God knows how I'm going to end up in 40 years. But what if there's that possibility that the understanding or the truth comes after the belief, and that's not self-deception? That's my kind of last thought. And if it is self-deception, I know. Trust me, I
Sure
know.
sounds like it.
I know that's what it sounds like, but maybe it just might be that one case where it's not self-deception.
Okay. Let me go back to something, and this is important because I'm being sincere here.
Go ahead.
If God exists, okay,
All right.
the Bible
Big
is
statement.
apology. The Bible is wrong on almost everything it says that we can show to be true or verify. Right? It's wrong on everything. There is no wisdom there. There's no morality there. It's nothing but confusion. Every scientific fact is false. The Bible is wrong, not true. Period. That's if God exists.
Yes, I've heard you
So
say that before.
and that's important. So what if the possibility that God exists, can you separate that from the Bible? The Bible's wrong, period. Gone. Doesn't matter if there's a God or not, but even if there is, God, Bible's still wrong.
All right, let's do that. Following.
There's a hypothetical situation. Can you come up with a God that isn't dependent on the literal fables that you've been raised on your whole life? Because that is all they are. They're stories that were made up by men and then passed on to other people by conquest.
So two things. Two things. Let me make sure I write the second one down. Just real quick responses. And this is assuming this might be kind of what you're trying to leave me with as well, because we're almost hitting the 2-hour mark. I don't want to keep you too long. So with what I said is this understanding, right? You believe it, and then now your eyes are opened, right? Let's just assume that's what happens. Let's assume it's not self-deception. I believe when you acquire that understanding, it's almost like a decryption of everything that would be confusing. You just get a certain understanding about it that you wouldn't have had would you not have believed. And it's not forcing yourself to come to that understanding. It comes naturally after the belief, I guess. And I know it sounds like self-deception. I'm hearing myself say it. And I've entertained the possibility. I've actually gone through a phase where I took that, I was like, you know what? No, I'm right. I am self-deceived. And I kind of went away from that. And I ended up getting in a lot of trouble and all this other stuff anyway, then I came back to it through, kind of sticking with that understanding I had. And every single time, at least for me personally, it's shown to be true. And that's because of the faith that you have. The faith is the precursor to the understanding.
Okay, that led you to believe in the metaphor of the trees being literal.
Yeah. Okay, even if that wasn't literal, I still have at least a lesson that I like to glean from that situation. So the second thing, I'm trying to stay on track here. I don't mean to ignore your points. The second thing is that personal piece of how can you know this God? And I know how crazy I'm sounding. You've heard countless Christians say this, but how can you know the God outside of all these fables? Let's just let's just say I took this and threw it off of the balcony here. It's just like all of it. I don't, the whole thing. I will still have a certain kind of understanding and relationship, if you will, where I can maintain these influences in my life to make certain decisions and to live a certain way. Without this, I think it's still possible. I think once you have that unlocked understanding, that unlocked wisdom, you can now live the way that God would have intended, according to God's will, not outside of His plan. But we talked about that.
I don't see it possible to live with both wisdom and God at the same time, as they seem to be mutually exclusive.
So,
but obviously we're talking about, but that's if you're talking about a different interpretation of God than what the Bible provides. The Bible definitely does not exist.
So that's kind of why I say this in terms of faith, then understanding, is because once you have that understanding, you get how it's actually not a dichotomy. It's not opposites with God and wisdom. It's one and the same. It decrypts it, essentially. It's the best way I can describe it.
When we say Bible God, we're taking the Bible, the things the Bible says, which prove that it's not wise, it's not true, it's false, it's amoral, there's nothing right in it. So no, somebody gave me the analogy once that all these different religions were just blind men trying to identify what an elephant is, right? Somebody's got the tail, somebody's got one of the legs, somebody's got an ear, somebody's got a trunk, right? And so this represents all the different religions. Let's assume that is true.
Okay.
Regardless, whatever part of the elephant your Bible is directing you to, it's not showing you the whole picture. And that means that somebody else, you don't have the whole truth, and somebody else, each of these other guys also has a bit of the truth, and you should know what theirs are. Now, so that's why they shouldn't have used the analogy with me, because right away I go exploring other religions.
Yeah.
And I don't just get the new ones like Baha'i and Mormons and Muslims. I found out that, there are other religions older than the Bible. Let's go read those. And that was fascinating, because they don't even have to do with the God of Abraham. Completely different gods, completely different pantheons. Judaism, on which Christianity is based on Zoroastrianism itself, to a large degree. And then the oldest religion in continuous practice is Hinduism, and that's a huge religion. That is mammoth. Just the number of holy books that they have is stunning. It's like a library as opposed to a single book. Where did all that come from? And looking at comparative religion is very often the best way to get out of religion entirely. I've heard people say, if you have a Bible, you may be Christian. If you have the Quran, you may be Muslim. You have the Bhagavad Gita, you may be Hindu. But if you have all three, you're probably atheist.
Yeah. I do think that's definitely a different discussion. I have my own spiritual beliefs and thought processes on why there might be all of that going on.
It would be different if you were raised in Pakistan.
Oh yeah, no, I've considered the possibility I wasn't raised Christian and raised very differently than I was, but obviously I can't really speak to that as much. I sympathize with everybody, including myself, and I try and understand everybody, and I will hear people out. I just want to make it clear. I hope I've even improved within this last time period. I'm not someone who's just going to shut out what you're saying and just say you're wrong every single time. Just because
I have done that. I've done a couple of times, but I don't mean to be arrogant about it, but the Bible is just, there's no defense. That just didn't happen.
I suppose my answer to that would be the wisdom and understanding come after the faith. The faith is the first step. I know it sounds weird, man. I'm trying to tell you. I can hear myself saying it.
If you have evidence against something, if you can prove that thing didn't happen, right? I got an 8-part series proving that the global flood did not happen. And not only did it not just that it couldn't happen, but we know that it didn't happen, even if it could have. We know it didn't. We know that's wrong. Solidly no, not just believe, no. Can prove, solid. That flood did not happen. Tower of Babel, we know that didn't happen. We know what did happen and how there's a kind of a nice parallel or a parable that came out of that. But that's not history.
So I'm going to just disappoint you here for a second. I don't know if my intention wasn't necessarily to argue creationism or to argue these historical events that are mentioned in the Bible or that are completely falsified that were mentioned in the Bible.
But if we're going to talk about, believing in God, you're going to suddenly find truth and suddenly the Bible is going to be true. It doesn't matter what you do or how you do it. It's not going to make the Bible true. The Bible's done. That's never going to get disproved.
You know what? Let me ask you this. What would be your first step to me to look at that stance? Besides me talking to you right now, to look at, give me just a something that I can look up or go to for. Let's go with the Tower of Babel. Let's say falsifying that or something.
Like the Tower of Babel. Okay, so the Tower of Babel was supposed to be a story that took place by Nebuchadnezzar, right? And he is, if I remember the story correctly, then this is roughly 600 years after Hammurabi, who actually started the Tower of Babel, the Marduk Ziggurat not the Marduk Ziggurat. Is it the Marduk? Maybe it is. I'm losing track. If that's the Ziggurat in Babylon that was said to be the Tower of Babel. And it was supposed to be that everybody spoke the same language until you create this tower. Stop, dogs. Damn it. All right.
I love dogs. It's all right.
We know that at the time of Nebuchadnezzar, and we know actually thousands of years before Nebuchadnezzar, that everybody was already speaking different languages. Not all the languages that we have today, because many of them have evolved since then. Spanish, French, and Italian and Romanian did not exist 2,000 years ago when all of those people, or the ancestors of all those people, were speaking Latin. And that would have been after the point that the Tower of Babel was supposed to have created all these new languages. The people who live in South America now are the genetic descendants of the archaeological artifacts of people we found 15,000 years in the past that were already living there. So that alone is proof that the global flood didn't happen. It's the same people living there now that were living there then. They were speaking their language, had nothing to do with the Tower of Babel. And it's not about disproving these stories. Remember, it's realizing that there's no truth to show to them. The fact that all these languages continuously evolve after and already existed before that story should be enough to disprove the Tower of Babel. That, and the fact that it wouldn't matter I've been on the Burj Khalifa. I've been on the observation deck, 148 floors up.
Oh, wow. That's one of my dreams to go there.
Yeah, you can imagine how mad God was when they made the Burj Khalifa.
That's a good one. I like that. I might use that. Well, I mean, so I don't mean to be rude, and I understand that was your point. I did ask for that. Just, I guess, if I did want to engage with a lot of these historical fallacies, I would find myself just kind of watching a lot of your videos, because I know I don't want to readdress with you a majority of the stuff that you've already talked about. Not that I'm avoiding argument or that I'm going to try and argue against it. In fact, I'm absorbing it. Okay, yeah, I'm absorbing it. Actually, I'm taking all these things. I'm sure you've heard the story. I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with this thing, and but I'm also putting a lot of faith into it as well. So I know I know who I'm talking to. I haven't forgotten. But I guess that still remains my closing question to you. I know you kind of already have it answered for yourself. That's just kind of what I kind of wanted to cape out here with. Honestly, though, I definitely didn't expect you to respond when I reached out to you. I was definitely excited, a little scared, just because I know how well versed you are with debating Christians and arguing against Christians. But I did kind of want to just kind of provide you the opportunity to speak with one who wasn't super aggressive and super just you're wrong and I'm right type thing. So
Yeah, and I realize that's what I was doing, but like I like to stay with what I can prove.
no, I understand. Yeah, you know what? I can still respect that position, and I hope that you can still at least appreciate mine for what it is.
I do, I think.
Okay.
I am going to have. I've just been notified that there's a thing I'm going to have to get on to, so
Okay. Yeah.
it's a perfect time to close it up. If you want me to make this public, I'll I won't set it up public unless you want me to. So we'll just leave it at that.
I don't think we've said anything or done anything that wouldn't be that would be bad to go. So I would say go ahead. I think a lot of my friends and family would find this interesting, and yeah.